Would I have remained brain dead forever? Thanks to my dear friend Ian, I never had to find out. For the next few months, we kept in touch. Ian was the first to congratulate me when the Berlin Wall came down. The reunification of Germany was victory for all, especially the British intelligence officers like Ian Godfrey, who had to suffer in the hands of the communist police. It was good to see change was coming. I was glad that chapter of my life was over. July, 1994. The beginning of the year 1994 was most difficult for me. I became embroiled in a transnational terrorist scheme that Richard had been funding with his white and illegal money. It was shortly after he had found out about my adopted family, who were very nice and gentle people. I had known this Russian woman and her husband since my arrival to the United States. I would live across the street with several other expatriates. 2 other Russian families lived in this neighborhood, and the woman who looked like my mother would sometimes send food to me and my roommates. I remember a time when one of my roommates was coughing from a seasonal American flu, and the Russian woman saw us and sent her husband with several trays of food and baked milk. I was touched by her consideration, and I knew if my mother had been alive, she would have taken care of me in this exact same way. I later saw how the woman and her husband both were very kind-hearted. She would stay indoors most of the time and take care of her children, while her husband would go around each neighbor's house and ask them how they were doing. I was impressed by how humble her husband was. He liked to take care of all the strangers in the area and provided food and shelter to homeless and poor people. In the few years that I was living in their neighborhood, I noticed the Russian woman adopted several orphan and foster children. I felt very grateful to know this Russian woman and her family. It made me feel as though I was still in Russia and was living among loving relatives. My comfortable life did not last for long, however, because soon, the woman and her husband started to have several biological children, and they moved from New York to work on a new job. Her husband became very busy after finishing PhD from Princeton University, and I saw them less and less, but the memory of that family lingered fondly in my mind. They were an opposite pair of people, with a wife very passionate and loud all the time, but also extremely caring, and her husband always speaking softly and agreeing to everything. I cherished those memories and hoped they would be a part of my family forever. But during one weekend, when I visited the house of my adopted family to see their sons who would play in the park garden, I noticed Richard and me followed. He also tried to have that family killed because somehow he thought the Russian woman and her children were related to me. But that family hardly knew me personally, and I merely wanted to believe they were my extended adopted family. My adopted mother's husband was from East Pakistan, and he would sometimes take his little boys to Muslim religious temples, but I never went there because of my deep Orthodox beliefs. However, Richard was misled, and he thought I followed the Pakistani religion. He thought I was Muslim, and now he wanted to take revenge on me by hurting all Muslim nations and people. He had already tried to destroy my mother's homeland in Grozny, and Richard also gave backing to the war in Sarajevo, where Bosnian Muslims were killed in thousands. But that was not the end of his anger and vengeance. He had something much worse planned. A month before Richard set his plans in motion, he expelled me from his Black Ops unit and told me to take a vacation to Europe. I became suspicious and planted several non-detectable hearing devices in the NSA Black Ops headquarters in Maryland. From those recordings, I was able to find out what Richard had planned. He was actively recruiting mercenaries to place bombs in the basement of 4 FBI buildings in New York and Michigan. He wanted to detonate those bombs and frame local Muslims for those crimes. I also saw that Richard used his Black Ops operatives to kidnap several Muslim and Arab American men and force them to make 5 propaganda confession videos in which they admit to blowing up certain buildings. It was strange, because at that time, those buildings were still intact. But it was through these recordings that I was able to figure out and identify the targeted buildings Richard had intended to blow up. I was shocked to see the location of the attacks. It was the heavily fortified headquarters of the American Federal Bureau of Investigation. I immediately contacted several senior FBI special agents and warned them that someone was trying to bomb their buildings and frame the Arab American community for it. Most of the agents thought I was playing a prank and was joking. Only one person believed me. It was the FBI Deputy Director Margaret Hine. She was an elderly woman but extremely spirited and brave. She sent regular state police to investigate and search those buildings, and the state troopers were able to arrest one man who was caught while trying to rig the first floor of the FBI building with powerful industrial-grade explosives. When the police interrogated the culprit, he admitted that an NSA Black Ops chief had hired him, and the plan was to detonate the bomb on Friday, so that everyone believes Muslims carried it out. The FBI deputy director also discovered the rest of Richard's plot. He had planned to blame the attack on the Muslims and make the US government arrest all the Muslim Americans and lock them inside concentration camps. When Richard got word that his plan failed, he was furious, and he tried to stop Deputy Director Hine from investigating and exposing his crimes, so he kidnapped her daughter and told her to drop this case. Margaret Hine contacted me to let me know her daughter was missing, and I personally searched for the little girl and finally found her hidden in a factory that was rigged with explosives. It took me 8 hours to deactivate the bombs from the pressure plate before I could rescue the deputy director's daughter. I was able to prevent Richard from blowing up all the FBI buildings, but I needed all the help from the wonderful and kind-hearted woman. I was impressed to see how the FBI female director went against her boss and continued investigating the case even after her daughter was kidnapped by Richard. Sometimes, one strong woman can be braver than 1,000 men. It was not until the end of 1994 that I was able to return to Serbia and disable their missile launching system. It was too late by then. Serbian nationalists had destroyed and killed countless civilians in Sarajevo. Serbian forces were targeting Bosnian towns, carrying out a ruthless ethnic cleansing. The Muslim-led Bosnian government was in shambles. They had no arms or manpower to fight against the Serbs. Nearly 3 million people lived in the territory that was managed by an inadequate Bosnian force. They all faced imminent annihilation. Thousands of Bosnians and Croats died already, millions were homeless refugees. The men were imprisoned in concentration camps, while their women were forced to work in brothels. I couldn't believe the world could change so much in such a short time. In the 2 years that I had been disconnected from the outside world, too much damage was already done. I reached out to a private banker in Bangkok who had access to my funds. I had him wire a large sum of money and hired a team of mercenaries to infiltrate into Serbia's armed forces. I needed to know who the players were before I tried to end this war. Another of my close contact at the agency worked at the White House. I shared my findings with him and gave him a copy of the report which proved that the Serbian generals, backed by Russian tanks and weapons, were planning to seize the whole of Eastern Europe, effectively pushing Russia and America into the brink of a very hot Cold War. Evidently, my message reached its intended recipient, and on August of 1995, the Clinton administration decided to intervene decisively in Bosnia. An ugly war had finally been halted. I did not forget the telephone call I had inadvertently received while dining at Richard's house. I was determined to find the identity of the man who was speaking on the telephone, so I went back to the house when it was unoccupied and placed intercepting wires on the telephone set. It would allow me to trace where the call originated from. Waiting in a parked van across the house, I listened in on all the phone conversation that Richard was making. I kept a recording of the phone calls as evidence and found out that Irina's father was involved in many shady dealings, including the organization of an Eastern European human trafficking business and Chinese organ harvesting industry. This explained how he had so much wealth. It was not normal for a director of the NSA Black Ops division to have so much money at his disposal. 5 days into the phone interception, I received the besought call. The man who had kidnapped me on the direction of Irina's father finally contacted him again. This time, I hung on his every word. The conversation was brief but long enough for me to trace the call. The point of origin was in a medical equipment storage 60 miles from the house. I jumped into the driver's seat of my surveillance van and drove to the given address. The compound was heavily fortified with electrified fences surrounding the perimeter. I used the pliers from my toolbox to cut a hole inside the fence and managed to enter the facility without raising an alarm. The interior was remarkably casual, almost like a vacation resort. The coat closet was lined with pressed uniforms. I grabbed a lab coat and threw it over my shoulders in an effort to blend in. There were indoor playground and gym in the lab. I walked past dust-free corridors that led to nurseries and classrooms. The door was ajar. I could see several nurses bustling over a newborn. I waited until only one woman remained and then entered the room. 5 infants were asleep in their respective cots. I demanded to know who these children belonged to. The nurse, who looked terrified to see an unidentified male in her nursery, refused to give me any information. I told her I was the chief inspector sent from the government. She said she only knew that these children belonged to a very influential man who used surrogates to have lots of offspring, but the man who was in charge of the internal affairs was the manager, a Dr. Garrett. I nodded, processing the information. Where can I find the manager? He is usually in his office, on the east wing of this facility, the nurse said. All the technical proceedings go on over there. We deliver the child here, but the lab is next to the manager's room. I thanked the nurse, but before leaving, I ran a hand gently over the child's head and secured 3 or 4 strands of hair. I had to know who these children belonged to. When I returned to my studio, I received a call from Dustin. My old comrade from the days in the KGB colonel's camp had reached out to me and was conducting his own investigation into the real culprit behind my disappearance. He offered to help with the DNA testing of the samples I collected from the medical resort laboratory. I mailed all portions of the children's hair to him, and he cross-referenced the results with the previous tests I had conducted, including Irina's DNA sample as well. Richards, the man who persisted in playing the role of her father. The same afternoon, Dustin called to tell me about the bizarre test results that showed on his machine. The children whose hair sample I had brought from the lab were 100% match with Irina. Meaning, those children belonged to my former fiancé. Wild thoughts raced through my head, and even though I didn't think those children were mine, I begged Dustin to tell me if he was able to positively identify the father of those dozen children. He didn't reply right away and instead gave an evasive reply. I continued to berate him until he mumbled that the paternity of the children was unmistakable. Richard was the father of all the children in the medical lab. My mind reeled from shock. Irina was Richard's stepdaughter. Yet, there are dozens of children being born from surrogate women who have been fathered by Richard and using none else but his own stepdaughter as the biological mother. I didn't know what to say. When I regained my composure, I called Irina and told her to meet me urgently. I gave her the time and place and collected all the evidence from the recorded telephone conversations as well as the DNA report on the lab children. I waited. Irina didn't interrupt me as I spoke. I explained all the discrepancies I had found out about the medical laboratory. I showed her all the lab reports, but carefully left out the part where the paternity test results was displayed. I knew it would break Irina's heart to find out the man she considered to be her very own father would ever steal her DNA and give surrogate children from her. The only thing I mentioned was that those children had her DNA and were her biological children. Irina did not seem too surprised by the fact. She recalled an operation she had to undergo at the direction of her family physician, Dr. Garrett, who suggested that her ovary needed to be partially removed. The timeline of Irina's ovarian surgery coincided with the surrogate birth of those children. Irina was horrified to see that so many children had been born using her eggs, and she begged me to tell her who the father was and who was responsible for carrying out this flagrant act. I pleaded ignorance, but Irina seized the documents from my hand and read the report in its entirety. Fortunately, she was unable to find out who the father of those children was, as I had discarded those pages before bringing her in this lab. I disliked keeping secrets from Irina, but I also didn't think she was strong enough to handle the ugly truth. Nevertheless, the fact that her eggs were seized without her permission made Irina livid with shock and anger, but I was more concerned that the physician was the man who had kidnapped me and had me tortured for 2 years. It was slowly beginning to make sense. Richard's obsession with Irina, his loathing towards me. I could understand why the old man was angry, but to think he would go to such lengths to keep me apart from Irina was perplexing. Truth seems to come out no matter what. For me, it was a lifeline. I had to know what I was dealing with. When I was taken to the Soviet training camp to be forced into a world of espionage, I knew where I was and what was expected of me. There were no false hopes. The colonel made it crystal clear the very first day that he would cancel anyone who wasn't performing at their maximum level. Failing a mission wasn't an option. Living in fear was overwhelming, but there was no personalized attack on me or any of the recruits. When I became sick of carrying out unsanctioned assassinations for the colonel, I tried to leave the group, but as per his ground rule, anyone leaving the circle was to be cancelled. I fled to America under the pretext of going undercover and spying for him, and found refuge with the director of NSA's Black Ops program, who happened to be Irina's father. He agreed to help me in exchange of information about the camp and its sleeper agents who were stationed in the United States. The man also got me acquainted with 2 KGB operatives who acted as my handler as we worked together to bring down the criminal organization I was part of. I was willing to pay any price to escape from the suffocating camp life and readily agreed to betray my former colleagues. My treachery did not go unnoticed. The colonel sent his best hitman to kill me. I was being hunted. Every alley became a danger zone for me. On my morning runs, I used to double back every block to lure out potential killers. Some of the assassins who were trying to kill me were fellow recruits I had trained with. We were bench mates and even friends. Nothing mattered anymore. They knew if they didn't do as the colonel ordered, they would be next on the target list. The present-day world was not as black and white as I had hoped. I was constantly being thrust into impossible situations and bizarre incidents such as the medical lab that I had inadvertently come across. Irina accompanied me to the place and was petrified when she saw the interior of the medical laboratory. She inspected the nurseries and found her uncanny resemblance in several children. Most were toddlers. They were being cared for by professional child care specialists. Inside a domed structure at the rear of the lab, we discovered close to 100 incubators. After much coercion, a lab technician admitted that these were new samples of the same batch of fertility supplies. The logbook noted that the mother of these children was Irina, and the father was listed as classified asset. For the first time in years, I saw Irina shriek in frustration and anger. She grabbed a fire extinguisher and used it to smash all the glass bowls that were fitted to the lab's machine. She didn't want any more of her reproductive eggs to be used by the obsessive pursuer and went to her father for help. She knew Richard had contacts in the CDC and NSA who would be able to find the identity of the children's father by conducting authorized paternity tests. I tried to dissuade Irina from going to Richard because I felt the truth would break her immaculate heart, but Irina persisted. When she confronted Richard about the medical lab, he dismissed all the evidence and said I was a criminal and a liar who have manipulated his Irina. He began to show her all the evidence of my past crimes, detailing all the assassinations I had carried out under duress while at the camp. Irina returned to my studio the next day and confronted me with the photographic evidence. She drew out her gun and aimed it at me and said she would turn me into the police. To her, I was a common murderer. I begged her to use reason. I explained everything about my past and how the rogue KGB colonel used a lethal microchip that was implanted in the base of our skulls to control us. If we didn't kill the bad guys, we would be executed instantly. I told her Richard knew who I was and what I did for a living, and that is why he agreed to help me get out of the Soviet training camp. He knew I was not a cold-blooded killer, but he was making Irina believe that I was inherently evil. Somehow, Irina understood my position, and she holstered her weapon and decided not to call the police. But she also didn't want to have anything to do with me and informed me that she was seriously dating a colleague at her workplace and was glad that he was an honest man and not a killer like me. I was stunned and tried to tell her that Noah had died only weeks earlier and whether she should take things a bit slowly, but Irina brushed off my concern and left the apartment. I don't know what Irina did after that, but I think she went back to her stepfather and demanded an explanation for my history in the espionage business. Richard admitted he knew about my past, but he showed her another video. Irina once more got convinced that I was guilty and rushed over to my place. She played the video in my computer. This one was time-stamped. It was after I had left the camp. In the video, I am standing in a room holding a steak knife. Then abruptly I plunged the sharp edge into the abdomen of a frail prisoner who was bound to a chair. The scene looked vaguely familiar. I realized that this was during my 2-year captivity, during which time I was brainwashed and tortured repeatedly. After starving me for an entire week, my captors compelled me to commit the murder after threatening to torture the man to death by cutting off his limbs, piece by piece. When I refused with the previous man, they tortured him to death in front of me, saying it was my fault he was suffering. I kneeled down and begged and cried, but they said it was too late and not to make the same mistake again. I didn't hesitate for a second with the next man. Someone had been videotaping everything, and the fact that Richard had access to the video feed suggested that he may have been behind my abduction. I told Irina what I thought really happened, but she still wanted me to surrender to the authorities and face charge for murder. I knew it wasn't an option and I fled the apartment. It was around this time I heard the fateful news. Irina's new boyfriend Tim was found dead in his workplace. The coroner ruled the death as suicide although failed to identify the type of poison used in the death, and police refused to open a homicide investigation because Tim had left behind a typed suicide note claiming he did not love Irina. I suspected foul play. What were the odds that two of Irina's intimate partners should die within months of each other in seemingly inexplicable circumstances? Someone was playing tricks on the good-natured young woman. Richard could not bear to see anyone getting close to Irina and was probably trying to do everything in his power to chase all men away from her life, but who could it be? I needed to know. So, I enlisted the help of Dustin yet again and requested him to give me a copy of all the security camera footages in Irina's workplace. Dustin was happy to oblige until he discovered that the cameras were scrubbed. No photographic evidence remained in the building. I had reeled in shock. Who would go to such lengths as to destroying video footage from all the security cameras in order to cover up a suicide? But I had to find out what had really happened to Irina's boyfriend, so I went to the site to investigate. The room in he committed suicide had a large window angled to the street side. I glanced out the window and noticed there was a conveyance door directly across the clear glass. If I could access the cameras that were facing the streets, perhaps it would have a copy of what had transpired in the room before Tim died. 2 days later, I managed to retrieve several lengthy surveillance videos, and with the help of Dustin, I was able to zoom in on the office building that was across the store's security camera. The scene that played before me appeared to have come from a bad horror movie. In the afternoon shadow, the video showed a figure move inside Tim's office, and after what seemed like an hour of deep discussions, the man neared his desk. At this moment, the camera was able to capture his face clearly for the first time. It was the unmistakable square, lined face of Richard. What was Irina's father doing in her boyfriend's office? Seconds later, I found the answer. Richard proceeds to open a water bottle and offered the contents to the young man, who peculiarly refuses the cordial gesture with a vigorous shake of his head. At this, Richard abandoned the niceties and forcibly poured the liquid down Tim's throat. Moments later, Tim lay prone on the marble floor of his office. He appeared dead. The camera shows Richard placing a crisp paper on the table and leave the office as purposefully as he had come. I was not as stunned by the events as I ought to have been, because by this time, I had some idea how violent Richard could become. Irina's stepfather had gone as low as to kidnap me, remove my male organs, and inject me with high doses of female hormones, all because he despised me being intimate with his stepdaughter. Her latest boyfriend, Tim, paid the ultimate price. But Irina was oblivious to her stepfather's evil deeds. She believed he loved her and was protecting her. I wanted her to see the truth, so I called her to my apartment and showed her the video. Irina refused to believe the footage was real, but after I verified the video's authenticity, she broke down into tears. Her questions were hysterical as redundant. Why would her beloved father want to kill her boyfriend? I tried to console her, but it was pointless. In a frenzied move, Irina rushed out of my apartment and got into her car. I thought she was not calm enough to be on the road, so I accompanied her. She drove straight to her father's house. Richard answered at the first ring and opened the door. He welcomed her inside and was offering condolences over Tim's demise, but Irina raised her hand and slapped her stepfather on his face. Richard looked taken aback and staggered, but Irina kept hitting him with all her strength. At this, I felt I had to intervene and tried to grab hold of Irina's arm. Unable to hit her stepfather any longer, Irina squirmed to get free and faced her stepfather. "You killed Tim." "I saw it," she shouted. When Richard didn't reply, Irina screamed again. "Don't you dare deny it. You were in the office when Tim died." "I know it." "Why?" she wailed louder. "Why would you do it, Daddy?" Richard looked as though he was going to cry. "Sweetheart, I had to. It was to protect you." At this, my face flushed with anger. I remembered he had said the same thing many years ago when he killed Irina's biological father in a senior center. "You killed an innocent man, Richard, and it had nothing to do with protecting Irina," I said coldly, keeping a restraining hand on Irina's shoulder. "Don't you tell me how I should protect my own daughter," Richard spoke icily to me. "I believed Tim would have put Irina's life at risk, so I did what any father would have done for his child. I killed him to save her." The conversation was becoming redundant. I became disgusted at Richard's insistence that he had to kill Tim to protect Irina, that I left his house and returned to the hospital that had registered Tim's death. The morgue still had his body for a secondary autopsy, so I slipped inside and secured a sample of his blood. If Tim was really poisoned, I had to know what kind of toxin was used to kill him. It would give me a clue as to who had supplied Richard with the spiked solution. I sent Tim's blood sample to the CDC's Office of Laboratory Science in Anchorage. They mailed me their results a week later. The poison Richard used to kill Irina's boyfriend was a variant of Novichok, a Soviet-era nerve agent that had not been manufactured in Russia for decades. Furthermore, the lab in Omsk where Novichok was first developed was decommissioned by the Russian government and shipped off to a storage location in Kazakhstan. Members of American military intelligence was known to have seized the shipment and moved the lab to the Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, where the nerve agent was being produced and stockpiled in a controlled environment. The military nerve agents like Novichok were capable of killing subject within minutes after exposure. As a result, the production of such poisons had been restricted in many countries, but the Central Intelligence Agency reserved the privilege of holding on to some quantity in order to neutralize Cold War-era enemies stealthily. It was the easiest way to eliminate undesirables while blaming the killing on Russia, since they had publicly manufactured it decades earlier. The use of poison in the death of popular or controversial figures tended to gesture towards Russian involvement, and the CIA seized on this opportunity more than once to eliminate threats or cause rifts in the relationship between America and Russia. This was hardly the first time an agency or NSA officer had adopted this dangerous course. I had to facilitate emergency meetings 3 times in the past decade between British intelligence and the Russia's Federalnaya Sluzhba Bezopasnosti, so they could clarify misunderstandings about the alleged murder of several political dissidents who had been living in England on exile. The Russian nationals appeared to have been killed by some sort of poisoning, and the MI6 was quick to accuse the Russian government to have carried out the attacks, but after painstaking investigation, I was able to prove Russia had no involvement in the poisoning of either the 2 former officers of the Russian Federal Security Service or the 5 Russian opposition activists. One of the leading activists was later treated in Berlin, where German Federal Intelligence Service agents discovered that one of his own aides used non-fatal dose of poison on him to bolster popularity and to undermine the sitting government of the Russian Federation. I was relieved to know that the man recovered completely. The deputy director of the FSB later confirmed that they had arrested 2 Finnish saboteurs in Moscow who were planning to administer the same poison to another outspoken government critic in order to show the international community that the Russian government was systematically murdering political opponents. Fortunately, the plot had been thwarted in time by the Russian intelligence, but they did not find out who had masterminded the operation. The poisoning of the Russian opposition party leader provided the impetus for the media to focus fear rhetoric on the migrant Russians living in Britain. Although within weeks, the allegations of poisonings were dismissed by English courts, damage had been done. The disintegration of the Soviet bloc had dispelled fear of a nuclear war, but skirmishes continued between the Russian government and Western Europe. When I defected from the camp a decade earlier, I hoped by permanently removing the last remnant of the rogue KGB colonel's operations, it would restore some of the trust that had been lost after the false poisoning allegations. Irina was devastated by the loss of her boyfriend, so she embarked on a journey of retribution and told me to hand her a copy of the video that incriminated Richard and Tim's murder. Since the footage was not acquired legally, the evidence from it was inadmissible in court. Meanwhile, when Richard found out Irina had filed an unnatural death report with the police, he publicized a false report about Tim's demise, claiming that Russian agents assassinated him using a banned chemical from the Soviet era. Although the news was far from true, popular media hung on every word of that bulletin and began to rerun the story. I could not believe Richard would spread such heinous lies about Russia, so I contacted Dustin and asked him to find me solid evidence that would dispel such rumors. I also got in touch with the deputy director of the FBI's counterintelligence division and shared Richard's video with him. Once he saw that the former director of the NSA's Black Op division had killed Tim in cold blood, he agreed to open an independent investigation and declared on the Bureau's news bulletin that Russia had nothing to do with the poisoning. It was common knowledge that anti-Russian rhetoric used by popular media such as television and newspapers served to heighten the fear of Russia to critical levels and contributed the UK and the United States to implement anti-Russian legislation. This caused a plethora of public policy changes in the United States that adversely affected Moscow, but I hoped by proving that Russia was not involved in the poisoning, I could help normalize the relationship between the two great nations. This was not an easy task, since anti-Russian sentiment was still embedded in the fabric of US society. The rhetoric had a strong impact over a malleable population who readily believed that the Russian government was a cold-blooded killer that had nothing better to do than execute political opponents by feeding them radioactive or nerve agents. To make matters worse, the American and British public seemed ostensibly predisposed to accept Russia as terrorist state and gladly accepted the poisoning narratives. Some ambitious senators and congressmen rallied on this point to elicit support in order to maintain the status quo where they could retain political and social power over their constituents. When Irina's stepfather found out I was exposing his lies about Russia, he left an anonymous tip at the CIA's switchboard, claiming I was person responsible for the poisoning of Tim. I felt as though my life was untangling all over again. I was being hunted, so I went underground, using a small group of trusted sources to funnel in the money I had saved while working with a former KGB colonel. There were millions of dollars available in various foreign banks, but I was still trying to bring them into the America so I could use it to purchase property, transportation or weapons. When Richard tried to contact me, I ignored his calls. He threatened to mail a copy of my financial records to the US Department of Treasury if I didn't meet him immediately and help him out with procuring several artifacts from a black market art collector. I ignored his existence and continued to organize my life. 2 days after Richard tried to contact me, I received a small package in my mailbox. It was a pair of Irina's earrings. There was a typed note attached to it which mentioned that she had been abducted. The kidnappers gave a list of demands. They wanted me to acquire the prototype of a new satellite that the US Air Force was constructing. The Navigation 9 satellite, Dustin repeated when I told him what the captors demanded in exchange of Irina's freedom. Why do they want it, Dustin? I wanted to know. What is so special about this satellite? It hasn't been built or launched yet, my hacker friend replied. There is only one prototype. It exists inside a hardened cavernous bunker in Chicopee, Massachusetts. No one can enter without the highest authorization. I put forth a question. It's an Air Force base. Dustin nodded. More precisely, the bunker is the command post for the 8th Air Force. As for the satellite in question, it is totally next-gen material. The technology embedded in it allows it to function in a GPS-denied environment. The Air Force's research laboratory designed this high-tech space communication system in order to make the satellite hack-proof. How can something be hack-proof? I asked. The N9 incorporate RF and visual sensors and passes the data directly into a ground receiver. The satellite is fitted with multi-directional antennas that can adjust to avoid interference while transmitting RF signals. The way this bird avoids getting jammed by external sources is by using a software-defined radio that switches waveform. Like I said before, it is a cool gadget. And if the bad guys get their hands on it, they could launch missiles from anywhere on Earth and we would be unable to hack into those fiery trajectories and stop it. Dustin paused. These satellites are ideal for sending signals in high-threat combat space environments, and it's cool if the USAF keeps these in possession, but if a rogue group gets their hands on it, they could defeat NORAD's jammers and strike anywhere. Now I understand why Irina's captors want to get this weapon, I said slowly. Dustin, keep working on the note, see if you find anything, any clue as to where it was printed. I want to try to rescue her without meeting their demands. Whoever took her are professionals, Dustin said unhappily. I've run it through every form of tests. Still don't know where they are holding her. Look, Dustin, I entreated. If I don't deliver the prototype, they will kill her. Dustin paled. I will retrieve the prototype from the secure Air Force base, I explained, and the next time they contact me, I'll tell them I am ready to make the exchange. Then you will have to embed a time-activated tracker on the item. Once Irina is safe, activate it and I will recover it and return it to the US base. How will you get into the bunker in Chicopee? Dustin said worriedly. You remember what I told you about the level of security there? Yes, and I also know there must be a weak point in the structure. Dustin, can you pull up the blueprint of the military base? The Russian hacker shook his head. It's not so simple. Only hard copies of the blueprint exist. Where? Inside the Roosevelt Building in New Haven. The security there is heavier than the White House. You'll need the highest authorization to enter the storage room of that facility. Get me an ID of a maintenance personnel. I will enter the Roosevelt Building, retrieve the blueprint of the bunker, and then get the prototype. And Dustin, hurry. If the kidnappers think we are stalling, they might hurt Irina. The next 12 hours had been the most strenuous time for me. I struggled to maintain composure and managed to retrieve the prototype the kidnappers had demanded. It was heartbreaking not to know whether my beloved Irina was unharmed or still alive. I had no external help, and the captors strictly forbade enlisting the help of the police or the FBI. I knew there was only one person who would be willing to help me discreetly and save Irina, her father. So, I called Richard and begged him to help me locate Irina and apprehend the kidnappers. Richard agreed and offered to make the exchange while he tasked me with surveilling the site and remain at a distance as his backup. I hurried to oblige. Irina's captors made contact at midnight. They gave the coordinates of a location in South Jersey and told me to leave the prototype under a park bench in Staffordsville. Irina was going to be dropped off by a van as soon as their man on site confirmed that I delivered the original item. The exchange proceeded, as per their directives, but Richard intervened and insisted I be present at the South Jersey location and receive Irina, while he would deliver the satellite prototype to the captors. I did not question his call and told him where Dustin had planted the tracker. I showed Richard exactly how to activate it. He assured me it will be done and urged me to pick up Irina. Irina was shaken but unharmed. I found her bound inside an Audi in the exact location the kidnappers had told me. I was immensely relieved to get my dear Irina back into my life. When I questioned her about who her captors were, Irina insisted she had no idea. She had kept blindfolded during the entire duration of her captivity. However, she was not hurt or molested in any way. I was thankful that the ordeal was over. The next day, Dustin informed me that the signal from the tracker was never activated, so he had no way of finding out where Irina's kidnappers had transported the item. My heart sank. I had taken one of the most valuable items from the United States military and inadvertently delivered it to terrorists who may use it against US interests. Now we had no clue where it was. I remembered specifically asking Irina's father to activate the tracker, so I called him on a direct line and demanded an explanation. "How dare you question me?" Richard said hotly, his voice reverberating over the phone line. "Why didn't you activate the tracker on the satellite prototype?" I repeated. "It was the US government's only piece. Now, thanks to you, they lost it." "You think I don't know that?" Richard yelled. "I didn't activate the tracker because the kidnappers would have swept it for bugs, and if they even suspected a foul play in my part, they would have killed my daughter. You know very well the tracker was a passive one," I reminded him. "It would never have been detected." "It was my call," Richard said, "and I felt it was safer for Irina if I removed the tracker from the device." "You removed it?" I couldn't believe it. One of the most valuable objects from the US Air Force was gone. "I don't need to hear your complaints," Richard continued in a chilled voice. "If it wasn't for you, my daughter's life would not have been in danger in the first place. It was your fault that she was kidnapped." I felt my jaw drop in surprise. Sir, how was it my fault? Because evidently, the kidnappers wanted something from you, so they used Irina to get it. So, from now on, I am ordering you, if you care about Irina at all, you will leave her alone. I love Irina, my voice broke, and I will stay with her whether you approve it or not. If you love my daughter, you will break up with her, Richard said loudly. What? I asked in surprise. Make her despise you, Richard clarified. Do anything and say anything that will make her hate you. That's the only way you can keep her safe. If she stays away from you, the attempts on her life will stop. You're insane. Am I? All I know is that her life came under threat because of her association with you. Richard thundered. I am warning you. Never contact my daughter again. She needs to have nothing to do with a lunatic Russian like you. Even hours after Richard slammed the phone, I couldn't think clearly. What he was saying wasn't making sense. I didn't believe that the kidnappers took Irina because of me. They were not supposed to know we were a couple. We had been so discreet. However, the conversation with Irina's father gave me the incentive to get as far away from him as possible. I disabled my phone line and flew to Chitter, a coastal city of Panama. Dustin accompanied me to my new home. I didn't worry about not having enough cash on me because I was able to collect roughly $400 million from the side missions with the colonel. During training years at the Russian Black Ops training camp, Dustin and I had worked as a team to collect and whiten the money before securing it in Thai and Nordic banks. The only dilemma I now faced was to bring in the cash to the United States and transfer it to unmarked dollar bills. I enlisted the help of several people whose life I had saved in the past while I was working as an assassin for the Soviet training camp. The colonel would give us names of the targets he wanted to have assassinated, but a few weeks into my field work, I started to take things into my own hands. Killing people in cold blood was not something I was willing to do, so I made deals with the intended victims and hid them from the colonel after faking their death. When I was first rescued from prison, the colonel, who identified himself as a former Soviet military intelligence chief officer, gave me a brief speech where he claimed to be an emissary of the various intelligence groups inside the Soviet Union. I found no reason to disbelieve him. I honestly wished every word he spoke was true. My previous years at the Siberian orphanage did not provide me with pleasant memories. For years, I, along with several dozen orphans, languished in a prison-like lodgings, where icy winds and sleet would seep in through the large cracks on the wall and mice would trample over our thin bodies. I was under constant attack by lice, scabies, and frostbite, and the only protection I had from the bitter winter chills was a threadbare blanket that was infested with bugs and lice. Aside from a handful of fellow orphans who treated me with warmth and kindness, my world was empty, without hope of happiness. Naturally, I ran away from the abominable abode and found myself embroiled in yet another kind of hell. This one was more formal. I ended up in prison for a crime I did not commit, but the courts decided that at 16, I should be tried as an adult, and so they passed judgment and announced the sentence. Death by lethal injection. For the second time in my life, I felt utterly helpless. Surrounded by thick stone wall, I was drowning in despair. I did not want my life to become extinguished in the ominous hall of the death chamber, condemned as a criminal, friendless and despised. Choking in my tears, I prayed to all those I loved. I could not stop weeping when I thought of my mother. She had died in order to save me, and I was going to die anyway. What failure. At the orphanage, the priests would say the deceased can't see us from the other world. If there indeed existed another world, was my dear mother watching me? Did she have any way of knowing that her son was to be put to death? I had no clue. The idea was so painful that I willed my mind to go numb. There was only emptiness and fear in my young heart. My prayers were answered, or so I thought. I died, yet was alive. The elegant colonel who had rescued me from the jaws of death offered me a second chance, a disciplined life in which I could make things right again. His thin aristocratic face glowed with patriotism as he assured me his training camp was a secret branch of the Soviet intelligence. During the probationary period, I was trained vigorously. By the 30th week, I had completed the weapons training and knew how to use a machine gun. The recruits were shipped off to a fortified castle in East Berlin, where we were taught land navigation, demolitions, unarmed combat, cold weather training and close quarters combat. The instructors demanded absolute obedience. I despised the forced servitude, but did not dare question their commands, and immersed myself in learning rope skills, language courses and sniper courses. I was demurely proud of my achievements. During recess, I could see the training instructors commenting on my exceptional performance. I was told that my clearance was upgraded. I would soon join the ranks of senior camp officials, which meant my next appointments would be to be based abroad. Mikhail explained to me how the colonel manages this powerful organization. He trains recruits to be fluent in dozens of languages and furnishes them with false identity before sending the young men and women to infiltrate the British MI6, Argentine Secretariat Intelligentsia, West Germany's Bundesnachrichtendienst, French intelligence, Canada's RCMP Security Service, American pharmaceutical companies, and the CIA. I was ecstatic to be part of such an elite team, but after I moved to America, I realized the colonel had deceived me as well as the other recruits. He was not an official member of the Russian internal or foreign intelligence services. He had indeed been a colonel in the KGB, but had gone rouge years ago and opened his own private camp where he trained convicted criminals and used them to carry out missions for him. Because most of his recruits were officially dead or permanently incarcerated, the colonel considered them dispensable. I too was sent under heavy fire more times than I can remember, and while many of my comrades died left and right, I somehow always survived. Every time I left the colonel's underground bunker, I would think this would be the last time I saw the open sky. But there would be another mission, another person who needed to be eliminated. And so, I began my own parallel missions to save those condemned men and women that had been marked to die. Carrying out those counter missions were not an easy task, because if those people the colonel asked me to assassinate showed up alive at any other location, he would have sent other equally adept recruits from the camp to eliminate them. Sparing their lives alone wasn't enough. They needed constant protection. I needed huge amounts of money to hide them, fake their demise, and keep them somewhere safe. Oftentimes, my efforts were futile because when my targets were discovered to be undead, another camp recruit would be sent to finish the job. The colonel watched his agents diligently, leaving little room to conduct side missions. If I had been caught doing extracurricular activities, he would not have hesitated to cancel me. It was a huge risk for me, but all the dangers I had to brave felt worthwhile when I visited the orphanage in Siberia. The number of children were increasing each year, and the wooden huts could not accommodate them effectively. I looked forward to the monthly visits, where I would have the opportunity to hand blank checks to the caretakers and request them to build stone houses that would shelter the orphans from the bitter winters.